Now, unlike Dr. Mack and some of our other esteemed faculty that will be speaking in this seminar, I'm not up here because of my field. I'm a linguistics guy, a TESOL guy, and that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm up here because I love Narnia. Have ever since I was a kid. Well, thanks. I had the books when I was a kid. How many of you know that there are 7 books in the series? Good. How many of you have read all 7 of them? Excellent. So how many of you know where my title comes from, further up and further in? All right, that's better. Good. I wasn't sure how many of you were aware of that. How many of you are like, there are books? I've always loved these stories. Read them as a child, watched the movies. Did you know there were movies before the Walden Media movies? Yeah, BBC. They actually started out as a TV serial, got stuck together on a DVD set or VHS set when I was a kid. But I would watch these and I knew one day they're going to remake those movies. I knew it. And I had it picked out. I knew who the next 4 Pavensis were going to be. These kids. That's me and my siblings. I'm the eldest of 4, and I said, 2 boys, 2 girls. I'm Peter Pavensi. I had it planned out. Now, you don't know most of those. I'm the one to your left. My brother Josh is the one to your right. My sister Andrea is the one right beside me. But right there between those 2, that's someone you do know. It's our chapel secretary, Amanda Amos, back there, who scanned you all in. Yeah, she's my sister. She's Susan. Partially. But anyway, so my title today, Further Up and Further in C.S. Lewis's Divine Allegory. What I want to look at first is the notion of allegory. And just in case you've forgotten, maybe you've not had intro to lit yet or you didn't pay attention, allegory is the expression of truths or generalizations about human existence by means of symbolic fictional figures and actions. Now, since I've called this C.S. Lewis's Divine Allegory, I want to address one issue. If you've studied or read any of C.S. Lewis's letters, he actually says that it's not allegory. He says that it's something different. So I've got a quote from one of his letters to a child named Sophia Storr. He says, I don't say, let us represent Christ as Aslan. I say, supposing there was a world like Narnia, and supposing like ours, it needed redemption, let us imagine what sort of incarnation and passion and resurrection Christ would have there. So it's not a direct one-for-one, this character represents this person, and this event represents this one. But instead, he's saying, if this world is real, how would the real Christ interact with it? So I would still consider, so if we look at the definition there, even though C.S. Lewis in a letter to an adult also said very directly, this is not allegory at all, if we look at the definition, the definition of allegory isn't that every single thing represents something in the real world, but the expression of truths. And that's what I want us to look at today is one particular truth that stretches across the board, across all 7 of the books. Now, since so many of you are fans, there is a debate among Narnia fans regarding one particular issue we can sum up in 2 pictures. Yeah. Which order do you read the books in? On the left, your left, you have the chronological order, the order of events. On the right, you have the publication order, the order that Lewis released them. And the problem with this debate is HarperCollins in 94 said, hey, forget the publication order. Let's switch them to chronological order. There's a whole lot there that we won't go into, but that's what they did. And so if you've bought the books at all in the last 20 years, you have that list. You have that order. These right here, that's what mine look like. Because despite the debate, I say publication order is the way you should read them. And the allegory that I want to show you today is stretched out across these 7 books. And it only works correctly if you go in publication order. And that's what I want us to look at. So, why publication order? As Dr. Mack said, I'm not sure I'm talented enough to do this, but we'll see. So, why publication order? There are several reasons. Most Narnia experts agree with me, or maybe I agree with them, but we agree that publication order is the best. And the reason we go with this are several, but I'm going to give you a few. First of all, if we look in chapter 7 of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, we have this quote from the narrator. Right after Mr. Beaver says, Aslan is on the move. And now a very curious thing happened. None of the children knew who Aslan was any more than you do. But the moment Beaver had spoken these words, everyone felt quite different. If you've read Magician's Nephew before Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, That statement, oh wait. Oh, sorry. I forgot about this slide. It's not in my outline, forgive me. I wanted you to have these abbreviations because here in a little bit, that's how I'll refer to the books. Common abbreviations of the titles, LWW, PC, etc. Sorry. Now, why publication order? There we go. That's the one I wanted. That sentence doesn't make sense if you've already read Magician's Nephew, because you already know who Aslan is. You're ahead of the game. And when you read this, and Language and Order was the first book you read, there's a sense of mystery. You don't know who he is. The children don't know who he is. But right after this, they all have this amazing response. They have different emotions that they feel. And you're reading and you're like, why? Why do they feel this way? Who is this person and what does he mean? You want to know. It creates tension. It creates mystery. This is a literary device called in medias res. Now, this is typically only used for stories, not whole series like this. But I'm going to extend it just a little bit because the fact is all 7 books work together as one story, don't they? And so this is one reason. In medias res, if you change the order to chronological, even though it seems very logical, you mess up this part. You mess up that aspect of it. But for another reason, and this one's a little different. This one's very supposition. This is me taking a stab at a guess from things that I've read in some of C.S. Lewis's letters. But possibly divine inspiration. Now, I know these books aren't Bible, but you learn an awful lot about God in them. And if you look at how did these books come about, like a lot of authors of fantasy literature, it began with a picture. C.S. Lewis had a picture in his head from the time he was 16 years old, before he even converted to Christianity. And that picture was not of a lion. It was not of children or a wardrobe. It was a picture of a faun, the half-goat, half-man, Mr. Tumnus, walking through a snowy wood with an umbrella and a bunch of packages on his arm. That picture was in his head. When he was about 40, he said, hey, let's make a story of that. And he wanted to make a story of it because he'd had refugee children from London stay at the kilns, and this 50-year-old bachelor, or 40-year-old bachelor who had never had anything to do with children, decided he liked children and wanted to write a children's story. But how did the rest of it come together? And that's the part where I think we see some divine inspiration, possibly. He says, at first, I had very little idea how the story would go. But then suddenly, Aslan came bounding into it. I think I had been having a good many dreams of lions about that time. Apart from that, I don't know where the lion came from or why he came. But once he was there, he pulled the whole story together. And soon he pulled the 6 other Narnian stories in after him. Now, this is, like I say, supposition, but I see a possibility of some divine inspiration here, and I think that helps us for something. But the last reason is the most important, and that's his allegory of the divine. Throughout the 7 books, there is only one thing that is consistent, only one aspect of the stories that happens in every single book, and that is Aslan. And who does Aslan represent? Christ. Present through the whole thing, kind of like our own world, right? Have you ever heard anyone refer to history as his story? It's kind of what we have with Narnia, the allegory of the divine. And that's what I want us to see here. So, thematic bookends. My title is Further Up and Further In. We all know where Further Up and Further In comes from. Many of you know anyway. Comes from the last book, the last battle. How many of you are aware that that actually begins, though, that phrase begins in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe? Have you ever seen it there? Chapter 7, again, in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. We have this quote. They found the beaver, but it still drew back, saying to them in a hoarse, throaty whisper, further in, come further in. Now, it's a little different in wording because we don't have the further up part. But take the context. Who is Mr. Beaver? Mr. Beaver believes in Aslan. He's waiting for Aslan. He's a follower of Aslan. And what are the children? They're lost and they're in danger. And here comes a servant of Aslan calling to them, come in, come out of the danger. It's not safe out there. Stop being lost. I'll show you the way. I'm going to take you to Aslan. How did you come to know Christ? How did you first come to know him? It wasn't by realizing he's the creator. You first came to know him because someone said, come out of the dark, come out of the cold, come know Christ. Let me take you to him. And then we get to the last book in the series, Last Battle. Chapter 14, we have Aslan saying, come further in, come further up. In the next chapter, Jewel the unicorn says, "Come further up, come further in." I included the rest of this quote because they're in the Narnian heaven. And we have this great line that I think is very important. The reason why we loved the old Narnia is that it sometimes looked a little like this. There are so many parallels we could pull out of these books regarding Christian theology and our beliefs and our future. Too many to go into today, but that's one quote I wanted you to get. And then in the next chapter, we have Farsight the Eagle giving the rendition that I used for my title. Don't stop, further up and further in. We begin by not knowing who he is. It's a wonder, who is he? And we're led by someone to know who he is. And then at the end, we're going just further into an infinite relationship, further up and further in. A lot of imagery in it that is very powerful. So what I want to look at right now is I want to go through each of the books, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, through Last Battle, in the proper order. And I want us to look at our developing relationship with Aslan, who, remember, is not a symbol of Christ, but who is what Christ would be if Narnia were real. And I want us to see the primary allegory throughout these books. In Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, we see him obviously as Redeemer. Edmund is a traitor. He's taken by the White Witch. She's going to kill him. Aslan sends his soldiers. They bring him back. He has a talk with him and then returns him to his siblings and says, "Here is your brother. There is no need to talk to him about what is past. It's forgiven." And you say, wait, the stone table hasn't happened yet. You're right. But Aslan has already cleared it. He says, don't hang on to it. And here's how we know that something has changed in Edmund. The very next few pages, the White Witch marches into the camp, right? She comes right up to Aslan and she points at Edmund and she says, "That boy is a traitor and he belongs to me. I have a right to kill him. I must kill him or this world will die." Everybody starts freaking out. Even one of the animals says, "Well, come and take him then," right? Everybody's freaked out except for one person. The one person not freaked out, other than Aslan, is Edmund. But Edmund had got past thinking about himself after all he'd been through, and after all the talk he'd had that morning with Aslan. He just went on looking at Aslan. It didn't seem to matter what the witch said. That's how our relationship with Christ begins. He redeems us. He forgives us. He wipes away the past, and suddenly we realize no matter what the enemy says, we don't have to listen to it so long as we keep our eyes on him. The other thing we begin to learn in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe is that Aslan is sovereign. We begin to learn that, and right away when we become Christians, we have questions. We begin to learn that he's sovereign, but we really don't master that concept right at first, do we? It takes a long time to really understand what it means that God is sovereign. But we begin to see this, and these quotes, this concept we see throughout the 7 books, constantly referred to. We see this quote here. Mr. Beaver says, "Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you." In Silver Chair, we actually see where he tells Jill, she asks him, "Do you eat little girls?" And he says, "I have swallowed up girls and boys, women and men, emperors and kings, cities and realms." We see that there is something to be afraid of. When the Pavensis in Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe first meet Aslan, we have this line from the narrator. "People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time." Now, we don't use terrible the same way that C.S. Lewis did. Terrible here, we use it to mean bad. Oh, that soup is terrible. That's not what Lewis means here. He's going with a more original meaning here. Able to incite terror. So he's describing Aslan. He's describing Christ as good, but able to incite terror. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We begin learning this right here at the very beginning. And then we have this last quote from Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe where we see he's wild, not like a tame lion. Now, where does this really come from? We can pick up on the basics here, but what a lot of people don't realize is that when he was working on Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, he was also doing some work with Mere Christianity. How many of you have read Mere Christianity? Okay, if you haven't read it, go read Mere Christianity. Okay? I am telling you, go read. But right in the beginning, he starts talking about philosophy regarding the existence of God. And he talks about 3 groups of people. You have the atheistic philosophy that says there is no God, therefore there is no moral law. And then over here you have the people who believe there is a God, and so therefore there is a moral law. In the middle, you have another group he calls the life force philosophy. These people say, well, there's an energy out there and it created the world, but it doesn't have a will to impose upon me. So there is no moral law unless I want there to be. He basically says what these people want, they want their cake and eat it too. They want to say there's a God when they need help, but they don't want to believe that he can tell them what to do and not to do. They want, quote, a tame God. I believe that's page 27 of Mere Christianity. He says that. So he takes that idea of a tame God, one that you can control, one that you train, and he puts here that Aslan is not a tame lion. So we begin learning right off the bat, he's our Redeemer. He saves me, yes. But we also begin to learn he's sovereign. There's a lot to be feared, respected, and loved. In Prince Caspian, his role shifts just a little bit, and we see him as our deliverer. And the first way we see him delivering, we have this great quote when Lucy first gets to be with Aslan again, and she sees him. And he looks bigger to her. She says, "You're bigger." And he says, "No, I'm not. I'm not bigger." He says, "But every year you grow, you will find me bigger." God isn't ever growing. He's always the same. But as we grow up, as we get bigger, as we move into new levels, you've heard the saying, new levels, new devils. You get new responsibility. You get more problems that you have to deal with. Those problems can seem a lot bigger, right? When we go to him, we find that our problems never outgrow him. As we get bigger and we get bigger problems and we get bigger responsibilities, new worries, new woes, he's always big enough to handle them. So we see that he delivers us from our worries and our woes. We see that he delivers us from our situations. He tells Lucy, "Go wake the others and tell them to follow. If they will not, then you at least must follow me alone." He points out to us that he can deliver us out of our situations, but we have to follow him even when no one else does. Then, when Lucy chooses to do this, she tells them no one else can see Aslan, and it's terrible for her. And Susan is extremely mean. She starts to leave. She's following. Everyone's following. Lucy went first, biting her lip and trying not to say all the things she thought of saying to Susan. Here's the next deliverance. She forgot them all when she fixed her eyes on Aslan. He even will deliver us from ourselves. And then, when Susan finally sees Aslan, he finally appears to her. He tells her, "You have listened to fears, child. Come, let me breathe on you. Forget them. Are you brave again?" And so we see Aslan as a deliverer and as a leader in our lives, leading us through situations and out of them. We keep our eyes on him. Voyage of the Dawn Treader. We see him as what? Does anybody know what we see him do here? He changes us. He's our transformer. You know the story of Eustace. He becomes a dragon. He wants to stop being a dragon. Aslan leads him to a pool, says, "You have to undress." He rips off his skin, and then he has another layer underneath. He rips it off again, and then Aslan says, "No, you will have to let me undress you." And then Eustace recalls of it later. "The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart." See, the first two things we learn about God, the first two things we learn about Aslan are kind of self-centered. Yay, he saves me. Yay, he delivers me. That's about me. But then all of a sudden we find out he's going to change you and make you better. Before becoming a dragon, Eustace was a perfect beast, just terrible person. And then he becomes a dragon, a real beast. And when that's taken away, he is changed and he becomes a brand new person. He really is transformed. And we see that sometimes that transformation hurts. Eustace isn't the only one that gets transformed, though. Lucy gets changed a little bit as well. When we get to the Island of the Voices and she goes to the magician's book and she opens it up, she's jealous of her sister and she comes across a spell to make her beautiful and she wants to read that spell. And then in the middle of the book, there in the middle of the writing, she found the great face of the lion Aslan himself. He was growling and you could see most of his teeth. He stopped her. Now she went on to read another spell because she wanted to know what her friends really thought about her. And she repented of that later and a transformation came in her life. And so we see a transformation in her. You also have the transformation of the Duffelpuds, everyone's favorite, the monopods, the one-foot guys bouncing around everywhere. They transform a lot too. A lot of symbolism there we won't go into. But at the end of the book, we have my favorite quote of the entire series. The end of Voyage of the Dawn Treader. They get to the world's end. And at this point, Edmund and Lucy have learned that their coming to Narnia is not about Narnia. It's about Aslan. And they're going back to their world. And Lucy says, "Oh, Aslan, will you tell us how to get into your country from our world?" "I will be telling you all the time. "Are you there too, sir?" said Edmund. "I am, but there I have another name." Remember that. We have a quote near the end that takes us back to that. "You must learn to know me by that name. This was the very reason why you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here a little, you may know me better there. This I will call the John 3:16 of the Chronicles of Narnia. The whole reason we enter Narnia is to know Aslan for a little there, to get to know a little bit about Christ there, so that we can know him better here in our real world." So, quickly to move through these next few books. In Silver Chair, we see Aslan as a teacher. He first begins by teaching that we don't initiate anything with him. "You would not have called to me unless I had been calling to you." He tells that to Jill right off the start. Then she has a mission she's going to do. He equips her, as a teacher should, for the mission ahead. He says, "But first, the first step is to remember. Repeat to me in order the 4 signs." He gives her 4 signs to look for to complete her quest. He teaches her those signs and how to remember them, repeating them in the morning, repeating them at night. And later on, they question those instructions, and we see that he is the perfect teacher and that Aslan's instructions always work. They don't do so well remembering them. They mess up a lot. But at the end, when they come back to Aslan, Jill is very apologetic for forgetting the signs and for not repeating the signs. And we get the greatest thing about Aslan as teacher. Not only does he correct us when we're wrong, but this quote I love, "Think of that no more. I will not always be scolding." That's just perfect as we learn his role. In The Horse and His Boy, one of the most surprising books, when you start reading The Horse and His Boy, if you're reading in the right order like this, you are completely thrown for a loop, aren't you? It's like, what in the world? Where are we? How is this Narnia? And eventually you figure it out, and it's great. But you have the character of Shasta and Aravis, and you have them trying to inform King Loon of the approaching Calormene army. And Aravis is badly injured by a lion. They get to a little oasis. They warn King Loon, and then Shasta is just pacing around saying, "I am the unluckiest person in the world." And a shadow speaks to him and confesses to being the lion that harmed Aravis. It's Aslan speaking to him. So Aslan says he's the one that ripped her back wide open. And that's terrible. Is that like God at all? Well, there's a reason for it. Go read the book to get the reason. But then he says this, "I was the lion who forced you to join with Aravis. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses the new strength to fear for the last mile so that you should reach King Loon in time. And I was the lion you do not remember, who pushed the boat in which you lay, a child near death, so that it came to shore where a man sat wakeful at midnight to receive you." When we first meet Aslan as our Redeemer, we're not ready to know that he is completely our guide in all of our situations, that sometimes the hard things are him teaching us things. We're not ready for that yet. But once we've learned that he's our Redeemer, our deliverer, we've learned that he's our teacher and he's our transformer, our changer, then we're ready to realize, okay, in those hard things, he's teaching me something. He is my guide. He's in all of those situations. We're ready for that. In Magician's Nephew, we obviously see Aslan as creator. Narnia, 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 awake, love, think, speak, be walking trees, be talking beasts, be divine waters. So we see him creating. But here's the power of creation. Creation is not, the act of creation was not done so that we can look around and say, "Oh, wow, God, you're amazing. Look at what all you've done." And I love that Narnia points out what it's really for. I love this quote. "Creatures, I give you yourselves. I give to you forever this land of Narnia. I give you the woods, the fruits, the rivers. I give you the stars, and I give you myself." The purpose of creation is not the wonder. It's wonderful, and we should look at it that way and see, oh, man, God, you're amazing. But it's to give us himself. He wants relationship. Back in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, we saw that the whole reason for this is by knowing him a little here, we can know him better there, right? Well, here we see that it was all created so that he could give us himself. And then we have the aspect of him being our protector. We see a little bit of the Redeemer here in this quote. "Before the new clean world I gave you is 7 hours old, a force of evil has already entered it. Evil will come of that evil, but it is still a long way off, and I will see to it that the worst falls upon myself." That's an amazing line. And once again, if you read this line before you read Language in the Wardrobe, there is no surprise. There is no in medias res. You know what's going to happen because you see this coming. You should read Language in the Wardrobe first. Then we see one other aspect of Aslan here. Once we've come to know him as our Redeemer, our Deliverer, our Transformer, and our Teacher, our Corrector, our Guide, and our Creator, we're ready to be commissioned. Now, some people will disagree with me on this, but this is the first time in all 7 of the books that we have a commissioning moment from Aslan. We have tasks and quests from the other books, all of the children doing things that Aslan wants them to do, but we never have a moment where Aslan challenges them with this kind of commission. I asked, are you ready? He tells Diggory, are you ready to right the wrong that you have brought into this world on its very first day? Diggory starts making excuses, and Aslan interrupts him and says, I asked, are you ready? He's commissioning him to a task. When we follow the process of getting to know him and we let our relationship with God mature in this way, we become ready for a commission. And then in the last book, we see 2 very important quotes that I want to show you. One, remember in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, he told Lucy and Edmund, there I have another name, you must come to know me by that name. We have a great quote from Lucy here. In our world too, a stable once had something inside it that was bigger than our whole world. Her relationship with Aslan, with Christ, has matured. Now, one of the greatest quotes in the book comes much later when it says, and he no longer appeared to them as a lion. Another one you need to read. But this other quote, we see him as judge at the end. You have all this happening. All these creatures come rushing to Aslan at the end of this book. The creatures came rushing on, but as they came right up to Aslan, one or other of 2 things happened to each of them. They all looked straight in his face. I don't think they had any choice about that. And when some looked, the expression of their faces changed terribly. It was fear and hatred. And all the creatures that looked at Aslan in that way swerved to their right, his left, the goats, just to say, and disappeared in his huge black shadow. The others looked in the face of Aslan and loved him, though some of them were very frightened at the same time. And all these came in at the door and on Aslan's right. And so we see a development of the role of Aslan in our lives and our relationship with him. And so to break that down into a quick list here, we experience him first as Redeemer and Sovereign, then as Deliverer and Leader, as Transformer, as Teacher and Corrector, as Guide, as Creator, Protector, and Commissioner, and then as Judge. I heard some of you kind of shout a little bit. You were a little happy about the idea about the chronological order earlier. Sorry, but I'm going to tell you that for the best experience of reading the Chronicles of Narnia, to get this allegory of the divine, to see who Aslan is, you need to read it in the publication order. Thank you.